Disinformation is nothing new, but it's much amplified and accelerated in the digital orbit of social media. There's a real responsibility for big tech in particular, even for online users themselves, to try and combat the disinfodemic as it has become known. But there's also a very clear role for journalism to put facts first in an effort to stem the corrosive effect on democracies of false news, propaganda, and lies. So with me today to talk about what journalists can do to right the wrongs of disinformation and its adverse impact on people's right to know is Toivo Njabela, editor of the Namibian Sun newspaper and a member of the executive of the Editors Forum of Namibia. Thanks for joining me today, Toivo.
Thank you, Gwen.
I'm Gwen Lister, host of the Namibia Media Trust's Free Speak podcast, in which we discuss all things media. Let's start out, I think, Toivo, by defining the word disinformation and how it may differ from misinformation. I think many out there, even journalists I've noticed on social media, don't really seem to know the difference between these two words, and they use them interchangeably. Mm-hmm. People in general may be even more confused than the journalists and the experts. So would you care to elaborate on this and give us your thoughts?
Yeah. Thank you, Gwen. Thanks for having me first and foremost. And also congratulations on a very brilliant platform that is this podcast, and especially the free speech nature of this platform. I think it's very important that we perpetually beat the drum of free speech in this country, because you see there's a degeneration from time to time of this, and a platform like this will actually work wonders in spreading that message. But to your question, Gwen, really for me the difference is the key distinction is intent.
Absolutely.
Between the two.
Exactly the right word.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, in other words, misinformation is spreading of information that is not correct, but without intention to misinform.
Absolutely.
A person who spreads this information is often under the impression that the information that they're distributing is correct. So there's no malice really on their part. But disinformation is when a person knows inside their hearts that indeed this is wrong information, but because they want to drive a particular narrative or a particular agenda, they spread it anyways.
Absolutely.
And they do it on a grand scale many of the times to reach as much footprint and traction as possible for those ill-intended agendas to gain traction. And that is very, very dangerous. So I think in not so many words, that is really the distinction from the way I see it.
Absolutely. And you know what, Toivo, what I tend to do to help others, especially younger journalists, because it's disinformation starts with a D.
Yes.
I use the word, I tell them, remember, deliberate.
Yes.
Disinformation is something that is manufactured, it's fabricated, whereas misinformation, which is like if you ask me which is the way to Okahanya and I misdirect you,
yes.
I'm not doing it deliberately, it's accidental.
Yeah, exactly.
So I say misinformation, M for mistake.
Yes,
so I
lovely.
hope that in that way people will get it more clearly. But thanks. I think it's important that we started on that note because, again, most people out there aren't really aware. What do you think, Toivo? You know, we talk about disinformation, but what do you think, for people listening, what are the effects of disinformation on society, and why should we even worry about it?
Yeah, it's a very dangerous thing to do, Gwen, to deliberately misinform, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
As you crafted it there very, very wisely. We've seen the events in South Africa this week,
Sure.
where even the President Ramaphosa, had to go on TV and say, look, do not share unverified materials. You know, there were old video clips from someone, not even from South Africa. You know, people saying, oh, the military is beating up people, even before the military was deployed on the streets. So it creates so much panic, it creates so much fear in society, intimidation, and all that. So instability for me is actually the most dangerous impact of that.
Absolutely.
Very, very dangerous. But I also think, Gwen, that, you know, we are trying to build a knowledgeable society here, people who understand, people who are informed, people who know what is happening within their surroundings. But the moment we bombard them with information that is deliberately twisted
Yes.
to meet certain agendas,
Right.
you're actually creating an uninformed society because people do not know. Not everybody is like me and you who have perhaps by virtue of what we do and also by virtue of our accessibility to certain things
Right.
that we may be able to verify this information. There's my mother in Okalongo, where I come from.
Yeah.
If she hears this information, she's likely. I mean, I am fighting, and I know we'll talk about it later. I'm calling my mother every other week and asking her, "Have you gotten your vaccination?"
Right.
And she
Right.
says, "No, but we are hearing apparently that thing is so dangerous." So you have, that is the real impact that you are getting, the real life impact that you are getting from this kind of acts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And how to keep, as you say, especially for, let's say, a more unsophisticated generation, but not only. I mean, even people who are on social media are some of the, people who believe all these things first.
Exactly,
And it
exactly.
is a job to try and convince people. But now we're going to get to media soon, but I want to first just say it is a journalist's responsibility, first and foremost, I think, to inform people as truthfully as possible and not to spread misleading claims, disinformation, conspiracy theories, among others. So in your case at The Sun, how do you get your team to report on these disinformation aspects in such a way that it doesn't risk the further spread of untruths? Because some would say when we report about disinformation, we're spreading something that is false or fabricated to people who might not have already seen it. How do you deal with that, Toiva?
Yeah, so Gwen, I think there are two ways to look at it. In the olden days, especially when fake news, the advent of fake news wasn't as worse as it is now.
Right.
There were times when we used to say, look, accord people a platform.
Right.
Especially in a free speech society, in a democratic society, do not only accord platforms to people who you agree with or who are actually, you may judge them to be telling the truth. There are people who, especially in the political space, you would see a politician is making up things, but you still accorded them space to say whatever they wanted to say.
Correct.
But then we reached a point where it has gotten worse now, that you can no longer just accord platforms to every Tom, Dick, and Harry,
Exactly.
just to say whatever they want, especially when that is damaging society at a grand scale. So what I've been telling, what I normally tell journalists, younger journalists, and my team in particular, is to say that first and foremost, everybody that comes to you with information, everybody, 121%, has an agenda.
Yes, certainly.
Now, we have to go through this agenda to scrutinize it. Is a good agenda or bad agenda? Because remember, there's also good agenda. If somebody comes to you,
The whistleblower type agenda, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what you do is apply your mind first and say, okay, first, sort of determine what is the agenda of this person leaking this information to me. Is it because there are some big people in their company that are stealing money and therefore it's a good agenda to expose this looting of public resources? Or is it because someone wanted to be promoted into a position and then once someone else was preferred to them, then they create other sort of things and just bombard you with this kind of information. So scrutiny of facts is very, very important, and there's so much that we must do in terms of verifying the veracity of all this information before then putting it out. But
Right.
you subject the process to so much scrutiny that it's not only a reporter that sort of have the
Checks the facts.
Yes, I mean,
Yeah.
I had someone this week. There was an article in the Namibian about the company Mediva Fisheries that was
That's right.
Yeah, and someone said to me, "What are the jobs of the editors? Why don't they detect some of these things?" And I said, "Look, there's a level of trust that you accord to your reporters. Not everything. I mean, if a reporter goes to Havana where a shack burned down and the person says the owner of the shack is Maria and not Martha.
Yes.
I mean, I don't have to go to Havana myself as editor again to verify if indeed the name is Martha.
Yes.
So there is a level of responsibility and trust that you accord to your reporters. But then where there are glaring issues, then you can really step in and say, but wait, this doesn't make sense to me. So it's a lot of processes that get involved there. But I think it's really to determine the intent of the person who brings you that information, and then from there you can carry on with other vetting processes.
Okay. I think, that at the end of the day, Toivo, is exactly what the major difference is between traditional media as we know it, and of course the sort of social media world where things are put online without any kind of process being followed.
Yes.
And that's not to say that traditional media are not always rigorous about the processes. And obviously we can't tell the whole truth. Sometimes journalism tells as much of the truth as it is possible to tell in a given time or circumstance.
Yes.
So there are, but at least there are processes. I think this is something that people do emphasize.
Yes.
By the way, just a quick step backwards. As a matter of curiosity, your mom in Okalongo, that information about don't trust the vaccinations, where did she get that? Was it from church, community, or WhatsApp groups? I'm just curious if you know.
But no, I have no idea really.
You don't? Okay.
But I think and it's a good question because I've never really asked her to say, well, where are you getting this information from? Is it from radio?
Exactly.
Or is it from the local coca shops? You have no idea really. But it's likely to be coming from the community itself there, from fellow villagers who are saying, look, we've heard about this thing, it will twist your DNA, thought process will be twisted and all these kind of things. But it's interesting, really.
Exactly. I'd be very curious if you do find out from her. Because I think, sometimes if we trace it backwards, where do people get hold of this information? We may be able to more accurately pinpoint real problem areas. I have another colleague who said her mother, also in the north, is saying, get me ivermectin, and the daughter is trying to say, don't trust that. Again, she seems to be getting that through family WhatsApp groups. Toivo, fact-checking really seems to be the new imperative. In fact, it's become a sort of industry. But looking at the social media feeds, as I did do, of organizations like factcheck.org, Africa Check, and others, and in our own context, Namibia Fact Check, these don't really seem to have much impact. When you look at the shares on their feeds, it's not very often people are going to look at who's verifying or debunking false news. Of course, I don't think they're a bad thing, but we need to be realistic about their efficacy. Far more people generally, and we know that from news media and sort of making a mistake and correcting an issue as the media are required to do, it's often the lie that is consumed far more than the correction that precedes it,
Exactly, yes.
But journalism by its very nature, and you've hinted at that now from what you've said in answer to the earlier question, is or should be about fact-checking. In other words, the journalists really need to do their fact-checking of their stories. The sub-editors need to take that further and question anomalies in the stories. And, of course, the editors. It finally comes to them. What do you think? Have these fact-checker institutions simply taken up a space in a vacuum which has been created by shoddy journalism? Should we even need fact-checkers, put it that way, if journalism is doing its work properly?
Yeah. No, they've stepped in and they've crafted the narrative very well there, Gwen, to say that they're exploiting an opportunity that they see. And we created that opportunity as an industry that a lot of times we have not gotten our facts right. And someone says, okay, so they haven't gotten their facts right. What opportunity lies in there for me as someone else, as a so-called fact checker?
Exactly.
And then they exploit that. And the danger with that is, it's a beautiful thing that we have a second alternative to journalism. But you don't want, we in this industry don't want to create alternatives, especially when we seem to be the ones creating these alternatives. We need to be the only alternative. Of course, everybody else can, but we shouldn't give another person a chance to essentially discredit our work.
Absolutely.
Because that is what will happen. If somebody produces alternative facts to what you have produced, they are actually saying that you are doing a shoddy job as you crafted it.
Exactly.
So all these new alternatives are only a call for us to really start stepping up our game and say, look, yes, it's an emerging industry, and that's okay. I mean, fact checking shouldn't even come from you want ideally people to be fact checking against maybe politicians' speeches.
Exactly.
A minister makes a parliamentary statement about the availability of vaccines in the country,
right,
and the fact checker goes to say, look, we have done our investigations, and this is what the minister said in parliament today was not a lie, or was not correct. That would be a very nice thing, but not when we who have always, portrayed ourselves as the sort of primary source of information, trustful information, being debunked in public like that. So it's time that we put in a high gear really to counter that.
Yeah, and really to up our game, I think, is what you're saying. And
Yes.
I think nobody would disagree,
Yes.
because we need to somehow get back the public trust.
Yes, very
for them
important.
to sort of turn their backs on disinformation and go to real verifiable media.
Yes.
Toivo, COVID has, and I saw on your social media this morning that you said you don't want to talk about anything related to COVID or to Zuma
Yes.
today. So,
Yes.
but I heard what you're saying, but I'm going to ask you this anyway.
Sure.
But COVID has presented manufacturers, and I use this word deliberately, with a huge opportunity to spread disinformation, whether it's organized groups who are making a lot of money out of these kind of fabrications, if you look at, for example, the anti-vax
Yes.
lobby, or individuals who are simply trying to discredit steps that are put in place to try and really curb this terrible pandemic. They take various forms, using fear tactics to discourage people from vaccinating, touting fake cures like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. Before it, we all remember that from back in the Trump era.
Yes.
Or even urging people to inhale elephant dung and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
The list goes on, let's face it. How do you try to deal with these particular conspiracy theories in your reporting?
Yeah. Look, Gwen, I've said all along that we must, that science has carried mankind throughout our existence. We are where we are today because of science, because of technology.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no reason why now, suddenly, we must start casting aspersions on science, the very science that have gotten us here.
Right.
If credible institutions, your WHOs, your scientific, renowned scientific societies, and everybody have come to say this works as far as COVID relief is concerned, this does not work.
Right.
Where do we get the wisdom today suddenly to be more cleverer and smarter than these people? So I say, science for me is the bottom line. If anything, of course, science also, you have to get your confirmation from credible sources again of science, because some people may be portraying themselves as scientific also, and they have anti-vaccine theories, for example. But you have to look out for the credible institutions that we have always relied on. That there is absolutely no reason why today, in the middle of the worst pandemic in so many decades, suddenly they are deserting us and just lying to us. No, there's no logic in that.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I've put science at the center of everything that we do. We verify these things. If a colleague comes to the office and say, "Oh, I also picked up this information," I said, I always say to them, where are you getting this from? Oh, from this one. Who are they?
Yeah.
Do you trust them? Have they produced any scientific paper on anything before? No, they haven't. So why do you trust them today? All those kind of questions.
Exactly. It also strikes me as you're speaking, Toivo, that the media's role has changed. If I think a few years back, I remember there was an outbreak, I think, of meningitis.
Yes.
And government urged people to go and get their shots against meningitis. We can look at before that polio and other things. The media never had to do a job of convincing people to go and get those vaccines. So again, it's peculiar to me how this has changed, and whether it's just the impact of social media, and more questioning, I don't know. I mean, we all know it's good to question and be curious, but to, just accept some of these theories, as people seem to do, is really confusing to me in many ways,
I mean, in addition to what you just said, Gwen, I mean, I look at on Sunday they just played the final of the European, the Euro 2020 Championship, England versus Italy, and the Wembley Stadium had about 60,000 people. No self-respecting government, no caring government would allow so many people in a stadium if they didn't think that their rollout for vaccines and everything
was effective.
Exactly.
Yes.
So these are all, we get proven, I mean, those of us that are pro-vaccine and all that, I mean, I proudly call myself that.
Yes.
We get vindicated every day. Every day we get vindicated. So why must we, and the other party is not being vindicated anyway at all. So, I mean, it's logical only that we follow science, really.
And also, I mean, just a final note on COVID. I mean, it has been a learning process for everybody, hasn't it? In the beginning, we were told to do things which don't seem to really apply anymore. So all the time we're learning what are the effective measures, whether it's masking, and I'm one of those. I'm a bit of a voice in the wilderness, but I keep saying, guys, eyewear is very important.
Yes.
If you're in an area where people are not wearing masks or not wearing them properly, I think it's going through the eyes if they cough or something.
Yes.
But anyway, I rest my case on that. Nobody seems to be taking much notice, but we're learning all the time.
Yes.
You've said it yourself, Toivo, the professional ability of journalism to verify information is now more important than ever before. And obviously, we can't turn a blind eye to this kind of disinformation out there because we do want people to get the facts at the end of the day. At the same time, you don't want media to spend all their time rebutting lies that are on social media and even risk, as I said earlier, amplifying them, rather than focusing first and foremost on bringing people positive, timeous, and accurate news and information that they can use. Any few comments on that?
Yeah. Again, Gwen, I mean, I look even at how I spend my days lately. My typical day now is spent on exactly that.
Exactly.
Telling people, we are on WhatsApp groups, we are on social media, we are even in the newsroom or at home. And you spend so much of your time, trying to teach people to say, guys, open your eyes, look at this. These are facts. And people are generally very difficult to convince otherwise. So it becomes a very lethargic day of just debating that. And by all accounts, this means that your most valuable time is being spent on things that you thought would have been very straightforward, really.
Exactly.
So you are right on saying that instead of spending the whole day debunking these theories, you want to spend the day producing new evidence of how far have we gone in our vaccine rollout? How many people have been vaccinated? Holding government accountable. Are they bringing enough vaccine doses into the country? Why are we running out of it? Holding people accountable.
Exactly.
Not teaching every person the whole day that what they are saying is not correct.
It's not true.
Yeah, so it becomes a vicious cycle. But you want ideally to put this at the back of your mind and really start focusing on journalism as we had known it.
Exactly.
Really bringing out new information every day. The things that people didn't know and stuff like that.
Yeah. Toivo, we also know, obviously, and you most of all, that the struggle to keep quality journalism alive, because you and I will both agree, we believe that this quality journalism is essential for people, especially in a democracy. So somehow we've got to keep it going.
Definitely.
At the same time, there must be, and I'm not an editor now, I was once, you are today. Is there not a temptation, or do you ever have to resist it, to kind of resort to the kind of clickbait or infotainment type stories that people are flocking to social media for? Or are you managing to really hold the fort and keep good journalism on top?
That is exactly what a lot of people are saying now, Gwen, that and I was looking at a video clip, I don't know from what date it is, from Denzel Washington, the actor.
Yes.
And he was talking about the media's desperation these days to be the first to post, not
Right.
without regard to the processes that have always defined journalism.
Yeah.
To say before you put it out there, you have to go through a rigorous verification and vetting process of that information. Right now, people have no regard for that, and I'm saying this absolutely. I mean, for me, credibility is more important.
Yeah.
To say, look,
Right.
Gwen may not have posted it as earlier as Toivo,
Right.
but we know that in Gwen, whatever she posted, no matter how late it was
checked.
it was all, yeah, exactly. Now there's no regard for that. People just want to be, oh, it was Gwen who posted it first. But,
Right.
but so what?
Right.
What substance does it carry, first and foremost? And there's no regard for substance.
Exactly. And also with journalists now having to multitask.
Yes.
You know, once upon a time we would just write our story for the paper.
Yeah.
Now we've got to put out a video clip, write something for online. You know, I suppose there is a tendency to sensationalize, but I guess, I mean, it goes without saying that you are trying to guard against that as much as you possibly can. Toivo, also, we've got to be honest with ourselves that there is problematic journalism out there, and we can't kid ourselves it doesn't exist. Whether it's sloppy reporting or errors not corrected timeously, even sensationalizing things unnecessarily or demonstrating bias at the expense of fairness. This, I think, probably, and you'd agree, allows disinformation to seep into our sort of news system, and that's an ever-present danger. Obviously, we can emphasize training of journalists, you know, read your code of ethics, become aware of media literacy, and so on. What else do you think we can really do nowadays to maintain and to really elevate these journalistic standards?
Yeah, I think the industry for a long time now, Gwen, has faced a lot of challenges that have now trickled in as variables to why certain things happen the way they do lately. So training, for example, at university, and I don't want to discredit any university at all,
Right.
but when you think of what you do today as a journalist and what you might have learned at university back in the day, there's a huge gap.
A very big
Yeah,
difference.
and you get interns in every time from universities, and might be interns you can even understand. I mean, she's only in her second year, might be, or whatever, and she's still still coming to terms with the concept of journalism. You have people who just graduated looking for jobs,
Yeah.
and they come to your office to say, "Look, I'm looking for a job now. Do you have any vacancies?" And it's unbelievable the levels of what the universities are producing. I mean, at this level, and I'm sure you've done this before yourself. I mean, we at this level we help a lot with the revision.
Internships and things, probably.
the revision of
the curriculum.
of the curriculum
Okay.
also a lot.
Okay.
Every once in a while, the universities come to us and say, "Look, guys, what is it that you as an industry want? What kind of quality do you want the output that we must produce from the universities?" And there isn't enough pace really to rectify things.
Right.
So it's and that's why the finest journalists that you have now, not only that are practicing now, but even those that have left the industry, were refined by the newsroom. That is where the actual quality of training and understanding of journalism came from, which is of course our obligation partially, but you want to have as much qualified graduates as possible when they come from university. Yeah.
Okay. As I say, it's an ongoing battle. But I think, Toivo, we accept that there's both challenge and opportunity, I think, for the role of journalism to reach greater heights of professionalism and ethical adherence to kind of beat back disinformation. And we know also that that's the best way to win back public trust. We don't know it's going to happen immediately, but it should do. Because, once upon a time, and I must hark back to even the Namibian in the 80s, in the pre-independence struggle era, that people ate up the information in that newspaper, which was, why can't we get that again today, even though it's peacetime, is a question that always plagues me. But does it make sense to you? Because in a sense, getting to those higher standards of journalism once again, does it make real sense to you? Will it pay your bills? Because at the end of the day, you've got to pay your journalists, you've got to make it commercially viable to run a newspaper. And how do we get people out there to be prepared to pay for good information?
Yeah.
When they can kind of get a lot of disinformation and rubbish online for free. How do we convince them that they need that to make better decisions about their lives?
Yeah, I think what should be at the center of all this, Gwen, is integrity. When you have built integrity as a media house, as a journalist,
Right.
Even commercially, because look, we are in business also, and business brands, and commercial entities, that the advertisers and smart partners that we want to link up with will only want to align their brands with integrity.
Right.
If they know that, yes, this particular radio station or television station or newspaper is really, really on top of things, they may not be always the first to post news on social media or whatever, but once it's out,
it's thorough and informative. Exactly.
Exactly. So it means you are building trust within your audience also, because you have 5 newspapers on the market on the street every morning. If I only have $5 and I'm saying I want to spend this $5 on only good and verified information, then you are actually, yes, you are putting yourself at the forefront of preference among both your audience, but also even your commercial partners who would want to be. So you don't want, you put a strip advert on front of a newspaper, and then the main news that day gets debunked the next morning in a thing. So it has so much windfalls for us if we are just credible.
I agree. And I think, obviously one has to prove that through one's journalism, so that people can, because after all, we want people to be able to make those choices, to be discerning about the kind of news they read and the information they get, and that they need to be more critical of different news sources in order to get those most credible. We probably come to the end of this discussion. I'd love to go longer, Toivo, but I want to ask you just a very last question that I often ask myself as well. Do you think, and we both on social media, I'm not on Facebook, just on Twitter,
yes.
But do you think that out there is still real appetite for real news and information? Or are we, who are trying to put quality journalism in the forefront, are we fighting a losing battle? What's your honest opinion?
It's a good question, Gwen. No, we are not fighting a losing battle. I think credibility will always prevail. There's competition, but competition is brought about by people who do not have the kind of quality that we bring to the table. Social media, for example, is competing with us. Citizen journalism, which is also a very good addition as far as dissemination of information is concerned. But there's always a difference between, because we have ethical observations that we also make. If I come across an accident scene, I don't go around filming people taking their last breath and distribute it on social media.
And even though you may have that footage, you're not going to use it because you stick to an ethical code.
Exactly. So that gives us an advantage. So what we need to do really is to redouble our efforts in first portraying truly that we stick to, there are parameters within which we operate, and that the verification of fact is important, and that we do not become part of the mob that distributes disinformation in particular. So if we continue to do that, and it's a huge fight, Gwen, I'll be the first to admit that it's a huge fight, because people are bombarded with information, and not everybody has the time and the knowledge to really distinct between what is disinformation and what is actually correct information.
Right.
But we must stick to the ethos and embrace new technology, and actually use new technology to show that we continue to reign supreme in the context of dissemination of information. So I'm very hopeful that we will continue to reign supreme and be on top of things compared to spreaders of fake news.
Well, thank you, Toivo, for all those comments. I think a very interesting discussion and a very positive note to end on. So thank you for that. And just to everybody listening out there, please look out for our bi-monthly Free Speak podcast on all things media. You can find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Google Podcasts. Again, Thank you very much, Toivo. I hope we get some feedback from this discussion
Thank you for
on
having-
social media.
Indeed.
And that it is good, intelligent feedback.
I look forward to that, but thanks a lot, Gwen, for having me. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Toivo.